that I should start in time. It's very close to Germany. Okay. Welcome. Good morning still. My name is Martin Damashek. Obviously, as you can hear, I'm local. I was born and raised and educated mostly in Prague. I serve as the junior pastor of St. Michael Lutheran Church in Prague, or Lutheran Church in Prague. The congregation is being served by an LCMS pastor, a male pastor, and I work for the LCMS in the region. And I was asked by somebody to cover the theme of Czech atheism and to take you through, or to take you on a quick flight through Czech history. Well, we got about 1,300 years to go through. So it's going to be very quick, and it will be 5 or 10 minutes for Q&As and discussion. I got an hour. Feel free to raise your hand if you don't understand something, if you don't understand the words that are coming out of my mouth, or if you understand, if you don't know, or if you want to ask something. Raise your hand who comes from Europe. Ooh, that's a European from. Thank you. Raise your hand who comes from North America. Pretty good club too. Okay, thank you. Okay, when you Google the country, Czech Republic, you would learn very quickly numbers. 11 million people in the country, that includes all the Ukrainian refugees, and not even 40% of them being religious. Very often when it comes to the US, one of the first questions is, why are you guys so atheist? And the second question is it because of communism? And my answer always is, well, of course it is because of communism, but if we have more time, and we will have some more time today, I'd say, well, it's a little bit more complicated and it goes much deeper. The atheism that you would encounter in the Czech Republic would not be, compared to the United States, militant or violent. It would be kind of undercurrent in the society. It would be a shy one, not militant one, that has something to do with the historical experience of the land. And it would not be what the colonists call scientific atheism. It would not be, most of the time, supported by reflective, conscious, philosophical, theological, or scientific arguments. At Western University, or at any university, in a course of philosophy, you can list a number of arguments against the existence of God or for the existence of God. But they would not be the discourse that you would have with the Czech. Rather, there is a sociological term for that. The Czechs would be believing in something. Somethingism. And that's the sociological term. They would believe not necessarily as in Eastern religions into spirit or into in ancestors or anything like that, but they would refer to principle or spirit with a big S, kind of the Hegelian spirit. So it'll be something like that. But atheism would be reflected, not supported necessarily with any arguments. Well, why? Why are we so? Why do you not invite a Czech to your home and preach the gospel to a Czech at your home, like you do in the States? Why do you not invite a Czech to the church for the first time you meet him? It all has something to do with psyche. with historical experience. So history does matter. I will take you through 3 historical traumas that did happen to the people and that shaped the psyche of the people and the behavior of the people. Christianity, of course, arrived from the West, or Southwest, from Bavaria. There was no Germany 4,000 years ago. So it arrived from the cloisters and from different parishes from Bavaria, from the Southwest. But in order to offset or to balance the Western influence, the ruler of the Great Moravia, which was a state entity that existed on the eastern half of the Czech Republic and in Slovakia, what today is Slovakia, decided that he will invite a mission from the east, from Thessaloniki. Where is Thessaloniki? Children.
Greece.
Greece, yes, from Greece. So on the 5th of July, 863, 2 brothers, 2 pastors, 2 brothers, Cyril and Method, arrived from Thessaloniki, and they brought 2 things, well, 3 things. They brought a scripture that they had translated into Old Slavic language that they kind of reconstructed or invented. And the third, they brought a scripture, because it is a script, so they brought it in the new alphabet. That's called Cyrillic alphabet, after one of the brothers. It was based on Greek letters. Does it remind you anything? Cyrillic alphabet. Where is it being used now? Russia, Eastern Europe, Russia, yes. It is based on the script, and the script was based on Greek alphabet. So when I arrived to Odessa, Ukraine, years ago, I could read at least the names of the streets because I could figure out the letters from Greek. So you have an Eastern influence. In 925 or 935, we don't know when exactly, good King Wenceslav was not a king, he was a duke. There is a song in America, the good King Wenceslav, where Saint Václav, he is the guy on the horse at Wenceslav Square. The Duke of the Bohemians made a deal with the Germans, who wanted to invade Bohemia, subdue it, and St. Wenceslav was a Christian who supported the church. He was the one who started building the church on the top over the city where the castle is now. And he made a deal with the Germans that he will pay a fee to the Germans, if you can say to the Germans, and a certain number of bulls and a certain number of cows, etc., to ransom the Bohemians from the war. That did not fly well with his brother Boleslav, and he invited Václav to his town for a feast. And the next day morning, when Wenceslav was going to the church to pray, 2 serfs of Boleslav stabbed Wenceslav on his back. Assassination. They assassinated the duke. And not only because Wenceslav was friendly to the Germans, but because Wenceslav was a patron of the church, supporting the church, and because he started building the church, the Rotund, where the castle is now, the church, the Western church, declared Wenceslav to be a saint. So you got an Eastern influence and Western influence. You're kind of in the middle of the continent, and both of these influences are meeting here at this time. Well, you walk the streets of the city of Prague, and you can read the alphabet, right? which influence did win in the end? The Western, we're using Latin alphabet. We're not using the Cyrillic alphabet as 500 kilometers east from here. Yes, the Western influence is one. The Western influence came to its peak, probably, in the first half of the 14th century. When you walk the streets of the city of Prague, you see beautiful churches, you see the Charles Bridge, you see the cathedral, etc., etc. Most of these beautiful Gothic buildings were built under Charles IV. Charles IV was the king of the Bohemians, the king of Bohemia, and at the same time he was elected to be the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was a federation of medieval states that spread all the way from the Northern Sea and the Baltic Sea, all the way from the Netherlands, at a certain point, all the way to Minsk, to the Ukrainian border. It was a chunk of land. If you drive from west to east and you wanted to drive through the Holy Roman Empire, you would drive on an autobahn, you would drive for 2 days. So it was a chunk of land. It was what the Western Christendom was. And Charles IV became the emperor, the left-hand kingdom head of Western Christendom. He built not only all the churches and the bridge, but he did three very important things that were influential later on. First, he made the city of Prague to be the capital city of the empire. So Prague was what Brussels is right now. Prague was about the third largest city on the continent, about 60,000 people. Good size county seat in the Midwest. It was rich. The Kingdom of Bohemia generated about 30% of GDP of the Holy Roman Empire. It was rich. You can see it in the city, all the beautiful churches. It was rich also because silver was being mined in the kingdom. The second important thing, Charles IV issued new constitution of the Holy Roman Empire, so-called the Golden Bull system. And the Constitution made a rule that the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire will be elected. It was an elected position by electors, and one of the electors was the King of Bohemia. He was one of 6 or 7. And Bohemia was not only the richest, but it was also the largest and the most influential state in the empire. So the King of Bohemia was an influential elector. And the third, which is very important for church history, he established a university. We call it Charles University. In 1348, he established the first university north of Alps and east of Germany, Western Germany. And please leave the naive idea that time in Europe was the Dark Age. No, university scholars, when you receive bachelor degree, you would travel freely all over the continent. You would visit other universities. You would correspond with scholars from other universities. They didn't use English, they used Latin, and everybody could understand each other in Latin. So we know that the scholars from the University of Prague were corresponding with the Wycliffes from England, throughout the continent, actually. So that's what happened in the first half of the 14th century. kind of the political peak of power of the Kingdom of Bohemia. At the same time, well, after Charles IV dies, a priest that you may know, his name is John Huss in English, in Czech, Jan Hus. You could see the statue in the Old Town Square, but if you want to see where he preached, go to the Bethlehem Chapel. It's very close to St. Michael. He received master's degree in theology at the University of Prague. By the way, it was 6 years of study. And he was elected the rector or the president of the university. And in his sermons in Prague, he criticized the church. He criticized not only the papal schism, but also the manners of the clergy. And he wanted to return the church to the ideal of the New Testament church. A little piece of theology. Back then in Europe, you would have an intellectual battle. Now we're fighting over easier things. They would be fighting for centuries it was a question whether values and ideas really do exist. That preoccupied the medieval university discourse. So, when I say value or an idea or conception of justice, when you came to university back then, they would be debating whether justice does exist or whether it is just a name, just an empty word. John Huss was of the opinion that these things really do exist. So when you say the New Testament church, there was an idea that John Huss wanted to reinstitute. John Huss did not want to reform the church like Martin Luther. He wanted to reinstitute the church. He wanted to return it to the New Testament idea. And any church that did not copy that or would not have the essential marks of the New Testament church would not be a church for him. Thus, you can refuse your obedience to such a church, as well as you can refuse your obedience to unjust government. Well, those of you who come from the United States, read the founding fathers of the United States and their arguments, or the Declaration of Independence, for the first third. Not a new idea. John Huss was already writing about these things. Based on this philosophical discourse. Well, also to say one of the revolutionary things that the church and the church should return to the New Testament church, which was poor. It would be one of the marks of the church. So John Huss demanded the church not to own any property. Well, that did not fly well with the church. And so John Huss, for his preaching, that had great support of the Praguers, not only at the university, he was put under interdict. Interdict was a church punishment where when the person was in the city, there were no means of grace administered in the city. No Lord's Supper, no baptisms, no marriages, no funerals. There was an interdict. So John Huss left the city and he went to the south of Bohemia, about 100 kilometers south from Prague. And the people flocked, following him. And he was preaching on top of hills. It was kind of allusion to let's say the Sermon on the Mount. So he was doing kind of the same thing. So the church declared anathema over Huss. cross. Anathema was a punishment that anybody could kill you and nobody could extend any kind of help to you. So you should have not given Huss a glass of water or a piece of bread. And anybody who would kill Huss would have not been punished. And then he received an invitation to the church council in the city of Constance, in between Germany and Switzerland now. Well, he took the offer, he took the invitation, he accepted. Because Huss thought that he will have a disputation. In the medical university, in a room like this, or a little bit bigger, you would send out letters to the whole continent and invite scholars for a debate. You would give the question, and you would give them about half a year, and they would prepare their points, their articles, and they would come and they would debate. And you would divide one party from another by a wooden bar, so they would not be fighting each other physically, but they would debate. They would debate for a month or 2 months. And then at the end, the university where the debate took place would publish minutes of the debate. So kind of like we say in Europe an almanac out of the debate, the conference. Well, John Huss was thinking that he's going for a debate. Wrong. He arrived and they put him to jail. It was a legal trial. They wanted him to recant. They were not interested in any theological debate. And they burned him on a stake in Constance on the 6th of July, 1415. Well, before he died, he was supposed to say the famous sentence that now you can burn fat goose. That's what his last name means, Gustavus. But one day there will come a beautiful big swan, Luther. That's why when you visit the headquarters of the Lutheran Church or Synod in St. Louis, in front of the building, on the pond, they have swans, intentionally, because of the sentence. And those guys know why they have the swans there. Well, burning Hus was not a good idea. The Bohemian and Moravian estates sent a protest letter. They affixed their seals and they protested. And in the beginning of August, I think, 1419, a Prague priest, Jan Żelski, one of the subway stations is named after him, gave a sermon at one of the churches in Prague, close to our church, and he took the body of Christ and they set for a procession in the city. They marched to the new town hall, where the people who wanted to receive the sacrament under both canons were imprisoned. They went into the room where the councillors or councilmen were, and they demanded the release of their brothers. But the council of the city refused. So they did a thing that we did 3 more times in history. They got hold of them and they threw them out of the window of the tunnel. That was first Prague defenestration. Defenestration, get out, fence the window. Throw somebody out of the window. Well, guys, we did it 2 more times. Very often pastors of the LCMS, when we travel, they ask me, you have this kind of interesting habit. You keep throwing politicians out of the window. Well, those councillors were not lucky enough. They landed on the Hussite spears, so they died. You can go to the room. You can be at the same window where they fly from, where they flew from. And that started the Hussite Wars for the next 20 years. Raise your hand who have ever heard the word crusades. Everybody. Where were the crusades conducted to?
Jerusalem.
The Holy Land, yes.
Spain.
Reconquista, yes.
The Baltics.
The Baltics, yes. Have you ever heard that there were 5 crusades that were conducted against the Bohemians? 5 crusades conducted from Western Europe against the Hussites. One of them was against the city of Prague, where the big statue on a horse on the top of the hill, Žižkov, is named after Jan Žižka, who was a general of the Hussites. You are in Žižkov right now. So 5 crusades. Most of them were not successful. They defeated them. They used mobile, fortified wagons, not wagons, wagons. It was kind of a wooden tank. And they used, have you ever heard the word pistol? What is it? Well, in English, pistol is a handgun, right? The word comes from Czech word pišťal. The Hussites were having flutes, and they would spit bullets against the nuts. That's where the word comes from. Well, most of the crusades were not successful, but the Hussites started arguing among each other. So at the end, as every war, the Hussite wars were finished with an international treaty that was finalized in the city of Basel in Switzerland, which today is Switzerland. And the international treaty, we call it the Compacts of Basel, gave the Bohemians and the Moravians 4 rights and privileges. At least they got something. The first one, the Bohemians and the Moravians were the only ones in Western Christendom who could receive the Lord's Supper, sub utracta specia, under the both kinds, the body as well as the blood. That's why you see the crop so much on the facades of different buildings. That was a Bohemian thing. So that was the first one. The second, all mortal sins were supposed to be punished without distinction who committed them. You were a nobleman, or a clergyman, or a layperson, or a serf. If you committed a mortal sin, you will be punished equally. Well, that was a revolutionary thing in the criminal justice system. Second, in Bohemia and Moravia, the gospel could have been preached by all ordained priests and deacons. That was a revolutionary thing too. So if you studied, you got ordained, you could preach anywhere within the Czech lands, even as a deacon. And the fourth, the most revolutionary. That's why the communists liked the Hussites. The clergy will not hold any property. That was, of course, the thing that was very attractive for the communists. That's why the communists used and misused us. One more reason why the communists misused us was that the Hussites established a new town in the south of Bohemia, Tabor. It rings the bell, right? You know the word Tabor. It's from the Old Testament. The town still does exist, and when they established it, Any citizen of Tabor who came would submit his or her belongings in the square to a big vessel. True Christian socialism, or communism, if you will. True Christian communism. Well, please do tell Alexander Ocasio-Cortez that it did not work for long. It worked for not even a year. It kind of disintegrated soon. Because, the Hussites did believe that Christ will come soon, so they wanted to establish New Jerusalem. Okay. The Kingdom of Bohemia was, of course, damaged economically, and as for all the victims of the wars, in pretty much every family we have somebody who would be involved or would be killed, etc. When Luther was returning from wars, he did remember Huss, and he was persuaded that he will end up exactly like Huss. The Lutherans in the early days did remember the Hussites, and they were expecting to end up the same way. Okay, now we move to, and I will stick more with my text. We will move to the 17th century, to the time after Luther. In 1618, we did throw somebody out of the window again. I believe it was July. The Bohemian estates decided that the Habsburgs are breaking their religious freedoms and privileges. So they decided to dethrone the Habsburgs. And where the House of Representatives right now is, they had a secret meeting. And after that meeting, they took to the castle. They got a hold of the governors, and they threw them out of the window of the castle. Third Prague administration. But the problem was that this time, those three guys landed on their butts in a compost. So they could run, and they went to Vienna, and they told it. Well, what happened? We started the 30 Years' War. In Prague, 1618, the Third Prague Administration started the 30 Years' War. But the Bohemians were not prepared. They were disorganized. The Allies, the Dutch, the English, and some of the Germans did not come to help. And the ordinary people in the towns and villages did not want to join the revolt. Why? Because they remembered the damages 200 years ago under the Crusades against the Hussites. So, Bohemian estates wanted to establish an estate democracy, like in the United Netherlands, kind of a medieval republic. However, they were not successful. So on a foggy morning in November 1620, the Bohemian estates lost to the imperial army of the Habsburgs at the Battle of White Mountain, nearby, in the city of Prague right now. The results were devastating and long-lasting. In 1627 for Bohemia, and in 1628 for Moravia, new land constitutions were issued by Emperor Ferdinand II without the consent of the diets. The diet was kind of the parliament. When a king wanted to issue a law, he would have to seek consent of the diet of the parliament that consisted of the nobility, the church, and the cities. Well, the Habsburgs did it by themselves. Because the estates was the Civil War. The effects were far-reaching. Habsburg absolutism, Roman Catholicism established as the only legal religion. If you did not want to change your confession, you better pack up your rucksack and leave your home, your homeland. So you either have to change your confession or leave. Then foreign nobility was invited and allotted land. So just imagine, you refuse to change your confession, so you have to pack up, leave everything behind, and your land and your house will be given to the foreigners. Good historical experience, right? Then 500,000 Protestants, most of them Lutherans, 500,000 of them, emigrated in the next 160 years. Lutherans withdrew into basements, literally, underground church, into basements. In the city of Prague, they would be meeting in basements and cellars. Into secret forest churches in Siberia. You can go to them and be them. Actually, I held a divine service in one of them years ago. And into secret networks. And people were investigated and interrogated about the confession of their family members. So a policeman, a commissar would come, and they would interrogate the whole family. What do you learn from that? First, you do not trust your government. Second, there's a chance that you got a Roman Catholic in your extended family, so you don't trust them. Then we move to 1781. Joseph II issued a toleration decree. So 3 confessions were allowed or tolerated in the Habsburg Empire. The Lutherans, the Reformed, and Orthodox, because eastern part of the Habsburg Empire. Well, you could have your services, and you could build worship houses, not churches, guys. No steeple, no tower, no entrance from the main street. However, all the property confiscated after the Battle of the White Mountain was not returned, and only 19,000 Lutherans remained in the Czech province. 19,000. That's a small county seat. Out of probably over 1 million before the battle. Well, full freedom of confession came in 1867 with the new constitution, and when the First World War ended with the collapse of the Habsburg Empire, we established in October 1918 the Czech Republic, and we learned from the Americans. The Czechoslovak Constitution was, to some extent, copied from the U.S. Constitution. When it comes to Bill of Rights, it was basically copied from the Bill of Rights. But that was only 20 years a short-lived dream. The Munich Accord of 1938 ended his short-lived dream. In 1948, Communist coup brought a generation-long red regime of the comrades, the Bolsheviks, the communists. In my household, my mom and dad, they would never use the word socialist or communist. They would always use the word Bolshevik. This regime, in line with Hegel and Marx, and the Communist Manifesto, propagated progress. For you guys from North America, when you say the word progress, it does not carry any negative connotation. For us, it does. It does Because in Czechoslovakia, this progress was translated or manifested itself in 5,000 people dying in communist prisons, 1,700,000 forced into exile, 200,000 people arrested and put to jail, and 300,000 people emigrated to the West by 1989. One of my uncles, swam across the Danube River to Austria, and he ended up in Las Vegas, Nevada. Visited him 20 years ago. And, of course, as for the church, and then we had all the beautiful things like collectivization of farming and the means of production, confiscation of private property, all the strict control of churches, internment of nuns and monks. Our family property was confiscated as well, of course. We got it back in 1991. But the Communist Manifesto, please send a copy to your congressman to read it. It's beautiful. It's quite an experience to read. It's short. It's about 10 pages. The Communist Manifesto divides people into two classes. And since the whole history is a class struggle, where the proletariat, those who don't have any means of production, will fight with the bourgeois, those rich ones, right? And eventually, the proletariat will become conscious of its necessary role in the historical progress and emancipation, and finally will execute revolution, which will establish classless and stateless society. Heaven on earth, guys. As my dad used to say, every time when we were leaving Czechoslovakia to Austria, he was saying, oh, now we're leaving the paradise. Well, everybody will own everything under communism. And my dad used to say, yes, and nobody will own nothing. Thus, you can steal. Very prevalent. Stealing because it belongs to the government. Very prevalent another thing, that is corruption. It doesn't matter, it belongs to everybody. Two antagonistic classes. The communists divided families and children into the working class and into all other socio-economic or historical and cultural groups whose members were the enemies of the society and the state. The working class held all power and was to lead and govern as it was inscribed in the Constitution of Czechoslovakia. We don't tear our statues. Go to Hradčanská station on the Green Line. Read what's inscribed on the wall of the subway station. It is a quote from the socialistic Constitution of Czechoslovakia. And it reads as follows, quote, all power in the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic belongs to the working people. End of quote. That sentence is still until now in the law. And around the sentence, there's a fist ready to fight the class enemy. Does the imaginary ring the bell? Don't you see kind of the same things today all over the West? In the city government, I was one of the voices who was against removing this piece of art. Because I was like, we need to remember what was in the past. Okay. No matter if you were a child and did not choose your social class, it was your guilt of being of the wrong social origin that was the catchword. You were of the wrong social origin. And you were treated accordingly And those of you who come from North America run through the images and the language that we are seeing and hearing now. No access to high school or university if you were of the wrong origin. If your grandpa owned a small factory, forget about any college education. You're the enemy. No good job, no teaching job, no job with the government, no access to a copy machine. Of course, you're dangerous. No travel to the West. And you were reminded of your wrong social origin in the school class. This stigmatization could go as far as your kid, your child, returning from a street fight and telling you that he or she cannot play with your neighbor's kids because the parents of the other kids say that your kid is the bourgeois or the capitalist, thus the enemy. Does it ring the bell? Are we hearing the same language today? And of course, as a Christian, you and your children were on the wrong side of historical progress. You were taught at your school that religion is the opium of the masses, Marx and Engels, and that your church is an obsolete institution that historical progress will do away with. We did not, the communists were not tearing down the church buildings like in Russia. But when you go to small towns in the Czech Republic, they changed the world differently. They would change the vision. They would put an ugly, boxy supermarket in front of the church. This is the new world, guys. You better forget about the obsolete old crap. Again, as it rings the bell, are we not reading and hearing the same discourse? And now, sisters, something for you. The liberation or emancipation. Please send a copy to Alexandra. The Communist Manifesto, you see shocking things that it says about family and women. Indeed, women are to be liberated or emancipated from the bourgeois family. Emancipated for what? The word emancipation in Latin means to make free. The old common saying goes, work the mother of the progress. So emancipated from man and children to work for the society. No surprise, the post-communist Europe, this part of the continent, had and still has one of the highest employment of women. Still has. That's true emancipation in communism. And women were economically much more independent than in the West, and still are to some extent. The liberation was done via government-run early child care, nurseries. After 3 months, you can put your child to a free charge nursery, all the way to the adult age. Yes, wow. Don't have anything like that in the States if you're not lucky enough that your church runs a nursery. Okay, please give my visit card to Alexandra. I will explain her and show her the institutions. In my district, we kept one of the nurseries. But of course, strictly communist curriculum at schools, and then by further control of the youth through communist organizations like the Pioneer or the Union of Socialist Youth. Again, the government and social pressure was intensive and ever present. Everyone had to be employed. My mom and dad had to carry a little booklet that was called Workbook. if you did not have a stamp in your workbook that you're employed, you would go to jail. Because if you're not employed, if you're not working, you're the enemy of the society. You go to jail. That's true heaven on earth, right? Homeschooling, of course, non-existent. If you homeschool your kids, you can be confusing their minds. Not to capitulate to the government and social pressure, and not to join the pioneer, equal to not having a work or social future, and to end up in the watch list of the Secret Service. My family was being watched by one family member as well. Belonging to Scout or to a semi-illegal Christian youth group, or listening to Western music, or just walking in jeans. Just walking in jeans would attract the attention of the state security services, and you could find yourself singled out in a classroom as the enemy of the working class in the state. Singled out at your school. Are we not seeing the same things again? Sometime. In some places. In the class, and this is especially important for you who come from North America, in the class, historical events from your country's history, like the Hussite movement, like John Huss, were interpreted and taught strictly according to the official Marxist line. And very often, it happened that as a child, you came home, and your mother or father retold you the same historical event from a different perspective, and you were advised by your mom and dad to keep silent and keep the truth for yourself. Your mom and dad would advise you to lie to your convent teacher if they taught you something different than in school. Again, what do you learn as a kid? Distrust of government and distrust of society, right? You better shut up, because anybody can be listening and you can be persecuted. And in the post-1968, after the Soviets came, in the post-1968 normalization, or we called it the goulash communism. The regime will give you the goulash, and you better shut up and play along the rules. If you don't, well, we'll do something to you. In the goulash communism, it led to a growing mutual distrust in the society, in extended families as well, and to the government, and to a withdrawal from the public into your private life, into your private spaces that were safe spaces, into your safe spaces of your flat and your cottage. You couldn't go to the West. They would not let you go to university. If you went to church, well, forget about any good job. Forget about any visa to leave your country, to cross the Iron Curtain. So, okay, you go to this farming, kind of a gardening cooperative, and you rent for little money, little garden, you build your little cottage, and that's your realization of your life. Your family, your private life, your flat where you can talk freely, and your cottage. So it's under communism, the safe place or space was your private life, your family, and the cottage. So I took you on a depressing walk through 3 traumas in the national history. 5 crusades against the Hussites. How dare you to criticize the church and bring it to the New Testament church? We will punish you. Then the Habsburg, absolutism against all the Protestants, and communism. So the answer to the question that I usually get in the States is yes, indeed, communism. but the roots are much deeper. The trauma is much more painful. The trauma runs much deeper. So why do we not trust the government? Answer is in the history. Why do we not trust the institutionalized religion? Answer is in the history. Why do we not trust even each other to some extent in the extended family? Answer is in the historical experience. And from now on, I will shut up. Okay, the floor is open for your questions or comments if you have some time.
Yes. Given the history of the region and the mindset, what is like the path forward for the Czech Republic as the church?
I will give you a Marxist answer. The old generations will have to die out. No, I don't believe that because the historical society is inherited. We have a wonderful experience in the church. One of the things that the Czechs would value and appreciate is because the church did collaborate with the Bolsheviks too. If a Czech sees that you're being truthful, authentic, or genuine to something in the long run, and you build trust with the other person, and you show authenticity in a good way, that flies. Then will be successful. If you stand up in the middle of the square and start preaching in spirit, well, you won't. That's not a way to do it. But at our church, it's in Prague, we stuck to the confession, and we've been preaching very conservatively. You can kind of trace the confessions through the preaching, I would say. And not only we grew 300% since COVID. Yeah, I mean, we would have 7 or 8 persons in the service before COVID, and now 30 plus. But Czechs are coming. I say it in English, but Czechs are coming. Czechs, young Czechs who understand English enough to understand my English, they will be coming. And they will be, I'm busy enough these weeks to have theological discussions with Czechs who are asking me about the confessions. So stick to your belief. If you want to preach social justice here, you're one of the other NGOs. You're not special. Nobody, if you want to preach, any kind of social justice, Czechs will make fun of it. Like, we have heard that kind of thing before.
Yes.
I wanted to comment because when I first came 7 years ago to Prague, and now again, it was quite confusing for me how atheistic Czechs are, because I come from Latvia, and we have deep roots too about the oppression and about communists and crusades and oppression by Russians, Germans, and even Swedish for some time. But still, we don't have so much atheism. We have, of course, but not so openly, I guess. And people, even in the 90s, when we gained our freedom, many people wanted to go to church. So it is like the immersive history. It's great, and I appreciate it, and I agree with all those things. But still, there are a lot of common things, but the outcome is different.
Yes, though there might be one difference, one historical difference, maybe, though I don't know to what extent. That's the same. I was asked by one of our Polish brothers the same question yesterday. Of course, Poland is a totally different story with John Paul II. As far as I know, in the Baltics, the Crusaders were earlier, and then the order of the German Knights was kind of, became part of the Baltic society later on. In the case of the medieval crusades against the Bohemians, it already was a national thing, because Bohemia was the richest, the most powerful part of the Holy Roman Empire. There was national identity. It was the point when the national identity was created in the medieval time. And it was a national disaster. It was a great insult from being the capital city of the Holy Roman Empire, one of the most developed parts of the empire, with an advanced university. You execute the rector of the university. And so the perception could have been different. The perception of the Hussites was this is not only religious, but it translated into a national thing as well. And unfortunately, the Hussites were burning down monasteries as well. They were not snowflakes either. So it was an identity issue already in the 1400s. That stayed with the people, the experience stayed with the people, and basically since Huss, the Bohemians have been ticked off at the church, at the Western Church. And the other difference is, but that's maybe a little bit the same in the Baltics, but we'll see. After the war, 3 million Germans in 1945, 3 million Germans were removed of the Sudetenland along the German border. And new people were resettled to this Wild West land, and they were usually communists. They were usually uneducated, blue-collar workers who were supporting the communists, and the Germans would be removed, and these people would get their property. And they were supporting the communists. And they already, it was a socioeconomic factor that played in the role. It was a huge shift in the population, but something like that in the Baltics too.
Yeah. Russians, because mostly communist Russians that came in and they got our property, and that's why they're like 34% of Latvian population are Russians because of that.
Well, the third thing that played a very unfortunate role was that in order to find a modus vivendi, the church did collaborate with the communists. Not in the 50s, there was the brutal persecution of the church, but under the Gulag communism, the church, a lot of people in the church did collaborate. There was a problem, especially in Silesia or in the Roman Church. And the people remembered. So that did not play very well in the 90s, especially.
Yeah, I think this is the answer because of how much I know about Latvian history. The churches, at least as much as I know, didn't collaborate.
Well, I comment, we did collaborate with the 80s. We had illustration in the church, so cleansing of anyone of the Soviet influence. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the difference with the Baltics, we never came out of this thing cleaned and cleared. There were never any trials, and the church itself did not reflect and repent. There have never been, actually in Silesia, one of the churches in the late 90s, they split because of this problem. And all these things were reflected by the general public. They're like, well, even the church was cooperating, even the church was infected, even the church was doing such and such. So with all the historical blend, all the experiences, this played a role. And I do remember vividly that in the 90s, this was one of the moral problems, that the church cooperated, never repented.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I would actually sort of want to take this issue like a little bit further as well, because I had a chance to visit Slovakia here before I came here, and like my subjective feeling in this issue is that there seems to be much more of a sort of growth in terms of church life in Slovakia as well, and considering like the close proximity that you have to this history between your two countries. So do you have any ideas on why that might be? Slovakia seems to have like way forward.
Yes, thank you. Czechoslovakia was a construct. Slovakia was Upper Hungary for 1,000 years. Czechoslovakia, one of the reasons why Czechoslovakia was created and Wilson got persuaded was that with the Slovaks, we would become the voting majority against the Germans in the Sudan. Slovakia had totally different history than the Czech lands. There were Lutherans. First, there were German merchants in the hills of Slovakia, and even the government in Budapest let them live because they needed them to be ready to fight the Ottomans, the Turks. So they enjoyed much more rights than everybody else because that was the military border against the Ottomans. Second, you got the hills, so it's less governable. And third, there is a substantial difference when it comes to the 20th century. Slovakia declared independence in 1939 and collaborated with the Third Reich. But the Lutheran Church, the Evangelical Church of the Augsburg Confession in Slovakia, did not. It's maybe the biggest Lutheran church in Europe that did not cooperate with Hitler. And that fact won over the hearts and souls of the people. And that's a big difference compared to the Czech lands. So, I mean, I can have all kinds of different reservations as for the church, but I must respect them for this. And it did play a role in the society.
You said that one of the four parts of the compact in Basel was that the church would own no property, but then you said in practice there was this thing where private citizens were also releasing all of their private property, donated it, and then that collapsed. How did they get from this teaching that the church and then applying it to private people?
Well, it was the most debated article, of course. And the Hussite movement was not a monolithic thing. Hus himself represented the discourse of the university. He ordained to be free for the preaching of the gospel, not to be busy with work. It was kind of a return to the New Testament church. But when it comes to the rights, to the ones living in power, you're dealing with the radical South peasants who are expecting imminent return of the Lord. Who are expecting the end of the world any day. And again, it was an attempt that did not work in reality. So they abandoned it very fast, very quickly. Even though it was one of the articles of the compacts, it never was translated into reality. And the compacts themselves were cancelled by the Habsburg Emperor. Not by the Emperor, by the Pope soon after. And they would remain law of the Kingdom of Bohemia still until the late 1500s, when the estates asked for the compacts to be removed of the books because they had a different political agenda. The most important was the Lord's Supper, of course, and the preaching, and the article on preaching. Because then in Bohemia and Moravia, you could have all these different small churches that actually sprung up. And anybody could preach, anybody could establish a congregation. And the Lord's Supper, of course, was very important even for the national identity. Actually, even until today, when we elect a new president for 5 years, and when he's being inaugurated at the Prague Castle, before the president-elect comes, they would bring the flag of the country, and then when they're bringing the flag of the presidential office, which reads the motto of John Huss, Pravda vítězí, in Latin, veritas vincit, truth prevails. That's Huss. That's Huss because before he got burned. They play the Hussite battle song when the presidential standard is being carried into the room, and in following our different standards of the military of the armed forces, very often you would see the chalice, you would see the cup. That's the heritage of the Hussites. In many buildings here in Žižkov, you would see the cup. It translated into national identity. All the way to the presidential inauguration, 700 years. Well, 600 years.
So I have a question regarding Janus. So you said that you developed a theory that basically we can resist evil magistrates, right? So how did you square that? Is there a theory with Romans 13?
With what?
How did you square this theory with Romans 13 that basically says we must stay loyal to the emperor and the government?
Well, the radical Hussites have no problem with that. Hus himself, he was in the line of the realists, so his argumentation, his idea was that the New Testament church is a true church, and there are certain substantial marks of the church, and basically he would to some extent, if the church is not reinstituted or reformed, for lack of a better word, it's not a church anymore. It's a form state. It's a form state church. So then he would say, well, you act in a just way if you receive obedience to such clergy, and you act in a just way if you refuse your obedience to such a magistrate. His understanding would be different than Luther's. And unfortunately, I mean, he was executed, so he did not elaborate on it anymore. And radical Hussites, they did not busy their minds much for their theological reason. They just went and threw them out of the window. It was a political thing then. I mean, as for political theology, that's an interesting question. I wonder whether somebody elaborated on that question based on primary literature of Huss himself, because you read the same things in the Declaration of Independence, but those guys took it more from Reformation and from Enlightenment. than to Huss. But Luther was more careful. Okay, well, I thank you for your attention. It was actually the biggest crowd that I have had in the past 3 days. Thank you very much. I don't know whether I will see you tomorrow for the service, but go in peace and serve the Lord. Thank you, God.